Anyone hungry? Just to make sure that you had enough food. There'll be food, there'll be treats on the bus, don't worry. Don't worry, not to worry.
You're going to explain that to
Okay, if everyone could find any seat, you don't have to sit in the same one you sat in during the last session. There are extra seats available, so think outside the chair. I think it's always helpful, a very helpful way to begin a conference with a type of keynote. We began our conference last night kind of with an idea given to us from Simon Sinek in the TED talk about how to kind of think in a different way. But he wasn't here for us to ask him questions afterwards. And so it's always nice to have a keynote speaker who has a certain expertise in subject matter that's very important to all the participants in this conference, and who can speak to the specific issue that we're focusing on, which is the changing Jewish landscape, challenges and opportunities. But I wanted to add also that sometimes I think it's really wonderful to get a keynote speaker, a keynote presentation from someone who's not inside the organization, but someone outside the organization who's seen lots of organizations, giving us the ability to kind of compare and contrast what it is we do with some of the thinking that he's going to present to us. And so for our keynote presentation today, we are privileged to have Dr. Stephen Donshik present to us. He's the CEO of Stephen Donshik Consultants Limited. He's served many prominent nonprofits in the US and Israel for more than 40 years, including as the executive director of a large family service agency in Connecticut, and as a faculty member at Yeshiva University's School of Social Work. In Israel, he's directed both the Israel office of the Council of Jewish Federations and the Israel office of the UJA-Federation of New York. He's a faculty member at the Hebrew University and is a frequent contributor to several professional and other important periodicals, including Philanthropy, in which we've seen his name and his articles there frequently. So, without further ado, I thank you, Dr. Donshik.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I feel a little bit anticlimactic after the very stimulating and emotional discussion that took place that I was happy to be here for. And in some of the remarks, I actually want to build on some of the things that were said. First of all, a little bit of ground rules. I hope you will engage with me. I hope you will question what I'm saying to you. And we can talk about it, we can explore it. You may feel that what I'm about to offer and about to say isn't directly applicable to the Melton program, to the relationship that the schools have with the communities they're in. And I would very much like to have a sense of looking at the issues and analyzing them with you. I'm going to divide my talk into two parts. One is to identify general changes in the Jewish world. And then the second part is talking about the implications of those changes for your roles as directors of the schools. And I'm not as much interested in providing you with solutions as I am with stimulating you to think differently, to think about how what I'm saying applies in maybe a different way in your schools than in other schools, how it applies in your school as different from a traditional nonprofit organization, because of the relationship that you have with your communities and the relationship that you have with the university. It's a different kind of model. And so I think we need to be creative in learning how to adapt that. But I do hope that you will leave stimulated by the issues I've raised, and that you were able to continue discussion over the next few days in Ein-Gedi. In no particular order, the changes in the Jewish world, some of them are similar to the regular world, meaning The world is much smaller today. This is done through the internet, it's done through email. Communication is unbelievable. I mean, to think 30 years ago when I came to Israel, that I could actually have an American phone number in Israel and people could call me, that I could communicate with Judy like I was in Wilmette, is unbelievable. But it's something to understand about the way we relate to each other and how that has implications and how people have access to each other, how they have access to institutions, how we're able to bridge the gap of time and distance. There's also been, and this was referred to in the comment about the mini school, the Milton Adult School will be there when the Federation will no longer be there. And I'm not necessarily agreeing with it, but what it does point out is to the weakening of central Jewish institutions in the Jewish community. And that we're living at a time period where we looked at, let's say in the United States, where we looked at the local Jewish Federation as the organization that would be there forever. It was the organization everybody counted on. It was the organization nobody questioned that they were doing good things or the way they do it. And it was assumed that everybody would give an annual donation to the Federation. Well, it's not that way today. The infrastructure that we have is beginning to crumble. That's happening, one, with umbrella organizations. And if we, and I just want to use this as an example, but if we look at, if any of you remember something called the American Association of Jewish Education, which was there before JESNA, the Jewish Educational Service of North America, right? People question today, do we need a JESNA in your field? People question, and what the institution used to be called the Council of Jewish Federation, then it became the United Jewish Communities, now it's the Jewish Federations of North America, and myself, in addition to other people, are continually raising questions about what's it doing, how is it doing it. So there's no longer any wholly untouchable organization. In terms of fundraising, what it then leads us to is the campaigns are continually under fire. In the United States, it's the local federation campaign, the UJA campaign. In the countries outside, it's the Keren HaYesod campaign. And something I'd share with you that's interesting is that Keren HaYesod has been a client of mine because they've wanted to find out why people give and why people don't give to the Keren HaYesod campaigns. And they actually engaged me to develop, and I'll talk about this in implications for you, a focus group process where their shlichim, their emissaries, their fundraisers, would bring people together to really understand why people are giving, why they're not giving, to be able to then refocus their campaign. Now, that's an incredible thing, because I don't think until recently these major Jewish organizations ever had an interest in it. They assumed around the world that if there was a Keren HaYesod campaign, Israel was important and people would give. But today, everything's up for questioning. And so we then look at it and say, are they relevant anymore? What's causing the difficulty raising money? What's happening with the changing donor base? And how do we understand that change? I think Judy circulated a review of the book, Tomorrow's Synagogue Today by Chaim Herring. Did you circulate that? You know the book, right? I thought we talked about it. Yeah.
No, I didn't.
So I want to show it to you, and I want to suggest it's worth reading for those of you who are not aware of it. What it does is he looks at the synagogue in a way that's outside the box, to use the common expression. And what he does question is, how is the synagogue meeting the needs of the people? Not only what the synagogue wants to do, but how is it meeting the needs and how is it playing a role in dealing with the Jewish community as it exists today. We also find, what I would say, a number of issues that deal directly with philanthropy, where, as I mentioned before, there was this holy view that we support Israel, we support our Jewish community, and we give money. Today we're dealing with something called personalized philanthropy, where somebody wants to know, what does it mean to me to give? Why is it important for me to give? Where does it relate to me? We're also dealing with issues that go beyond the needs of the Jewish people and dealing with what's referred to as expressive philanthropy or impulsive philanthropy. Expressive philanthropy is where I give because it expresses something that I want to identify with and express. It can happen in tragedy like the hurricane in New Orleans, Katrina, or what happened in New York with Sandy. And what this supports is something called impulsive philanthropy. I read something in the newspaper, I see something in the news, and I just want to express it. When people begin to respond to either personalized philanthropy, expressive philanthropy, impulsive philanthropy, what it does is it works against building community institutions, because it says we no longer have one way of focusing and supporting the one community. We also, and I'm sure you experienced this, what's appeared in the research about people moving away from Israel and feeling the younger people feeling a disconnect with Israel, not relating to either the history or the importance. And last but not least is the issue of the changing demographics in the community. This has to do both with certain communities aging, with other communities losing people, perhaps through intermarriage, which raises a whole issue in terms of the changing landscape. How do we relate to intermarried couples? What's the commitment that we have through our educational institutions and our synagogues for reaching out and including them in some way? Or do we just feel that somebody made a decision to intermarry, they're not part of our system? When you put this bundle of changes together, I believe it offers a challenge, particularly if you're involved in education. And I think that the challenge that it offers is one that not only meets the needs of helping somebody increase their own knowledge in education, but has the ability, if it's done in a way, to strengthen the community. So what I would like to do is to focus on implications. But before I do that, are there any questions about what I've talked about?
Can you just repeat the name of the book and the author?
Yeah, it's Chaim Herring, and it's called Tomorrow's Synagogue Today. And when you read it, I want you to read it as the Florence Melton School of Adult Jewish Education. I mean, you make that switch in your mind. Some of it will be very applicable, some of it won't be applicable, but it offers a conceptual framework of thinking of an institution, a community institution in our lives that has an impact. Anything else? Okay, I just wanted to let you know that after we finish the second part, if there are other questions on the first part, I'm happy to respond. I believe I was very fortunate to hear what was said in the first part of the session, because I think it will make some of what I'm going to say to you built on some of the things that I've heard more relevant and easier for you if you choose to adapt it to your roles. One of the things that I understand, well, the other thing I want to say is, here's where I hope that some of the comments will have implications for how you view yourself as the director of the mini school, in the adult school of learning in the community. Listen, I grew up in the age in Israel also, like Yonatan, when it was, in all the meetings I went to, whether it was Jewish agency meetings or other meetings, it was always the Melton Mini School. In the 80s, I had an opportunity also to meet Florence and to be at meetings with her. One of the things I understand that you're facing is decreased allocations from local communities for the schools, which then puts an added pressure on the financial aspect of the school. And what I want to focus on is how can I suggest things that will help you strengthen the financial basis of the school, the finance basis of the school, in light of the changes that we see happening in the Jewish community. And what's fascinating to me is the ironic part of it is since 1992, over the last 20 years, there's been this really big push on Jewish identity and on bringing people back. And here, I'm sure this is frustrating to you, that you have a proven product that in this era of the importance of education is being less than fully supported. And where you see resources available, and the question is, when the resources aren't available, how do you begin to develop those resources? How do you begin to develop friends, what I'm going to call them is friends? And almost as if I want you to make a switch from fundraising to friend raising. And how can this be done? One of the things that I think is very important, that you know better than I, is establishing your identity and a brand. In other words, in the community, where does the Florence Melton School of Adult Jewish Learning, what brand does it have? If I say to you Hershey's, you know chocolate. But if I say to you Melton, does everybody think creative, passionate Jewish educational program? And so one of the issues you have to focus on is how do you develop that brand? How do you work with people to spread the word so that there is a uniqueness to what the Melton School has to give? I know you'll say to me, well, how do we do this? I think it's possible to do, and in the context of what I'm discussing, I hope that it'll give you some ideas. It means really creating a place for the school. Is the school, and you know this better than I do, is the school seen as an adjunct to another organization? Or is it seen as an important institution in the community that's in partnership with another organization? In other words, is it a program of the JCC in the community? Or is it in partnership with the JCC? And this has to do with how you, and we'll talk about your, I forget the word, not boards, but advisory. Your advisory committee, your advisory board, how you and the advisory board work together. But it's something you have to think about. It's developing a sense of not only the place, but also a sense of the community ownership of the school. The community has to have a sense that they own the adult education program. It's not something that you're out there like a store offering and advertising and want them to come in, but something that has to be developed so they feel an investment. Not that they feel the investment in the ownership so they tell you what to do, but again, it comes back to the sense of partnership, because you're based, the uniqueness of the franchise is that you have a base that's connected to the university. So it's you have a certain independence, but it should not prevent you from developing a sense of partnership with the other institutions. When you have organizations that have a sense of buy-in, that is, and I don't know, in addition to federations and JCCs, if you also have partnerships with day schools in the community or other institutions. Each of these, the buy-in is important because it then leads to shared ownership. And shared ownership means, as we say in Hebrew, ichpat li, it's important to me, I'm concerned about it, that there is also going to be a sense of investment, that the adult Jewish learning, the School for Adult Jewish Learning, it's not just something that it's giving us, but it's something we're giving to ourselves and we're concerned about. And it has implications for a whole host of other ideas and discussions that take place in the community when there's a sense of buy-in. And less of a sense, this is what the school is doing for us. More, this is what we are doing for ourselves. Very often, I refer to the three dirty words in communal life. Those three words are cooperation, collaboration, and coordination. They're words that often people feel that by entering into these relationships that are fully cooperative or fully coordinated or really collaborative efforts, that they're giving up. They're giving up something in terms of the institution. I look at it the other way. I think when we enter into those relationships, we get more out of it. So here in your communities, you have to think about the different levels. Coordinating means you don't hold classes on the same day that there are other standard communal events. Coordination means the community is interested in letting you know when the community events are taking place so that you can make sure your calendars are in sync. Cooperation is when you may cooperate with each other in a program. Here is where I get, kind of naive, and I don't know, you'll let me know if in the North American community, if there are any school programs developed particularly for a board of a federation. No?
You mean Melton?
Yeah,
Melton.
Yeah.
We've done that.
Yes,
We've
Right.
done it.
And community centers for the board, not for the community. What?
I don't think we, because I've wanted something like that. I don't think we have it anymore. I thought it hasn't been updated in a long time.
That's right.
We're not a specialized program, but using Melton as an opportunity to bring
No,
boards together as a.
Right.
Yes.
I'm talking about a specialized.
Yes.
one.
Yes.
I'm talking about something that's focused and a negotiation taking place and saying to a Jewish community center, we have a unique program and you're aware of it. We've been in the community for X number of years. How can we begin a discussion around the idea of our doing a special curriculum or focusing the curriculum for the members of the board? Now, what that does, I'm sure there would be overlap between advisory board members and community center members or federation members. But that's an excellent example of collaboration that leads to buy-in and investment. You need some of it, but even to have the discussion, even to say to the chair of your advisory board, who also may be on the federation board or maybe on the community center board, to say, let's talk about this in our advisory board, and let's set up a meeting with people from the federation and have the discussion. And you know what? I have plenty of time. So if it takes you 10 years, don't give up. Don't give up. Since communities work in a slow process, it's a discussion that can take place in an education committee of either the center or the federation. If it's appropriate, to be done in coordination with a school, a Jewish school in the community. But these kind of collaborations then place the school in a different position. And what I learned from Judy, and what I learned this morning, is that I think one of the essential pieces is placing the school, your school, in a place where it's seen as the community having an investment in it. And that leads me into the other area in terms of resource development, which has the sense, and I'm being a little bit crass in saying this, and that's moving from recipient to solicitor. My sense is that you have been in the past the recipient of community funds. So what does it mean to place yourself in another way and see yourself as somebody who's out there raising funds? And I'll define what I mean by raising funds. You've received allocations, and you haven't, as I understand it, had to take full responsibility for raising your own budgets. Yes?
I don't know, it may depend, but we've been responsible for our own budget for 13 years.
And raising in the community?
Right, that's how it works. We didn't get an allocation until 3 years ago.
Okay.
But Portland is unusual, and I think that,
And
Cape Town is, there are a
And
number of
Toronto.
schools that
Dallas
are.
doesn't have an allocation.
What?
Dallas doesn't have an allocation.
You raise your own money?
Well, we raise it through tuition and and through some fundraising to supplement, yes.
In Denver, we don't have a direct allocation. We have trickle down through Cage, but we're increasingly raising our own funds.
In Detroit, we receive our money from our allocation, but we are very active in fundraising efforts with the Detroit campaign. And I go into every classroom, I give the pitch for Federation. We make sure we look carefully at how our students are doing and the commitment. So that's very important.
We have no community allocation at all. We haven't for many, many years. And everything that comes in is from tuition or from my own fundraising. I have to go out and get it.
Yeah,
And that includes my own salary, that includes the franchise fee.
Yeah, London's the same.
In Atlanta, I have an endowment, but the JCC expects me to make money at the end.
You mean that the school should be work on a profit basis? Did anybody over here want to make a comment? I find the comments interesting. I'm curious as to the communities that are doing separate fundraising. Is it done in coordination with the advisory board, where advisory board members are also involved in raising funds and coordinated with the community, so the community doesn't see it as competition, but the community understands that it's something that needs to be done? Yeah.
Stephen, can I ask a question
Yeah.
about your question?
Yeah.
When
This
you,
is Talmudic, this is disputation. This is the basis of how we develop as a Jewish people.
when you use the word community, are you talking about the community that we serve, the community of potential learners, or are you talking about the community that makes up our sponsorship?
Yes. The second-
Which, yes.
The second. In other words, does the formal organizations, that's when I use the word community.
Thank
that's
you.
what-
Okay.
Does the formal organization put any restrictions or look
Yes.
down
Yes.
upon?
Yes.
Or-
Yes,
Ah,
sections, yes.
Yes.
okay. So here, so what I want to suggest is, I think the advisory board, which I understand plays a large role mostly in policy and in how the programs are structured, but doesn't necessarily take full responsibility for the resource development. I want to make a suggestion that here is where a mind shift should take place in order to position the school differently. And what does that mean? In the same way I talked about the concepts of buy-in and collaboration and using the advisory board members will develop a stronger identification and commitment to the school through those kinds of activities. And I also believe that when institutions use groups of volunteers, whether you call them boards of directors or advisory boards, to also be involved in, let's say, beginning negotiations with the traditional communal structures that may put restrictions, to put the issues on the table and to say, look at what we've been doing, look at what contribution we've made to the community as a whole, look at how many students we've had. At the same time, you're cutting our budgets, and not you to do it alone as the director. As the director, you're a paid employee. But if it's advisory board members, it's people who have some standing and connection to the other leadership in the community. And it's something that both serves the school and serves your school, but also serves the community. I believe it's part of positioning the school in a different place, but also strengthening the community by the community understanding that there are people out there who are very invested in not only the existence of the school, the sustainability of the school, but also the growth of the school. We often resource development kinds of things are, people look at the uncomfortable part of asking somebody for money and don't look at the process that takes place that often builds connection through the discussion. And here, I want to just switch for a moment and go a little bit deeper into this. And I want to relate to what was said this morning. This morning it was talked about passion and how passion has played a role in the existence and in the expansion and development of the schools and the passion that people have played. And you also heard the word participant. I believe that these are keys because the issue is not meeting with somebody because they're wealthy in the community and say to them, you have the ability to give us $10,000 a year, why aren't you doing it? That's not the issue. The issue is how do you form a relationship on the basis of their passion and concern for Jewish education? That's the issue. And that relates to what I said earlier about personalized philanthropy. And that relates to what I said before about friend-raising and not fundraising. In Hebrew we say, Kodem HaKesher v'achar כך HaKesef. First the connection and then the money. And that's where the focus has to be. The focus has to be on the development of the personal relationships and the raising of friends of the school. And that idea that of feeling connected and feeling a passion and understanding, and because I'm either concerned about intermarriage or I'm concerned that people don't know the Aleph Bet of Jewish history or don't have any understanding of the basis of why we feel so connected to the land of Israel. In other words, that relates in getting connected to an individual and that person feeling, that I didn't know that about the school. It wasn't clear to me. I knew you were doing classes, but I didn't understand the way the curriculum was developed. And part of that also relates to the uniqueness. Because for instance, if I'm talking to a potential donor and want them to be closer to the school doesn't give lip service to a connection to Israel. The Melton program is based in a strong connection to Hebrew University. It has its base, one, with Israel, and two, with the community. And I'm saying that gives you a very strong point of relating to people. And it requires a little bit of a mind switch in terms of how you envision yourself and how you envision the school. And it also means that you have to work with your advisory board members to get them to this place. They may not be at this place, but to understand that we have to connect with the politics in a community. And each of your little politics, each of the politics of your community, I'm sure there are politics all over, but they're different in each community. And it means understanding that. It means mapping the leadership, understanding the connections that your advisory board members have to other leaders in the community. Excuse me. It also means understanding who are the potentials that have not been tapped. Who are the people that care so much about Jewish education, but have never really learned about the mini school, the Melton School of Adult Jewish Learning, and have never been brought into an inner circle. And that means sometimes your advisory board member meeting with somebody, sometimes it means you meeting with somebody, sometimes it means you and an advisory board member meeting with somebody, and engaging them in a meaningful discussion. The word meaningful relating to something that speaks to them and cluing into their interest. I want to give you an example from something in another context. When I was working for the UJA-Federation of New York here in Israel, we were seen as a potential funder because we gave out close to $15 million a year in grants. And people would often come into my office, and I would see anybody who wanted to meet with me, if I could be helpful to them. And they would sit down, and I would say, why did you want to meet with me today? And then they would begin a 45-minute talk about what their agency does. And I would say to myself, you don't understand. You're supposed to come into my office and you're supposed to say to me, what are the funding priorities of the Federation? And how do I connect what I do to your priorities? So I say to you, it's the same model. You saying to the people you meet with or your advisory board members meet with, what are the issues that concern you in the Jewish community? What's the basis of your involvement in the Jewish community? And then, when they say that, you find a way to connect the curriculum, the school, the students, the contribution of whatever the School of Adult Jewish Learning has done in the context of the community. That's your challenge. Your challenge is to make that connection. But if you don't start where the person is at, you're going to be in a sales position. And I want to say to you, you need to be in a position of engagement and not in sales. And you need to switch it. Because fundraising is not about sales. It's about the personal relationship. Another challenge I hear you face, and I want to use the same model to approach this one, is talk about the declining enrollment in some communities. And here, when you build an advisory board, or you think about the next program year and who you ask to be on your advisory board, you want to think about people who would be good at recruiting. When you make a call as a professional. When you make a pitch in an organization, you're a professional. But if a student who had been in a program makes a presentation or talks to other people, or if you have an advisory board member who's also an advisory board member and has also participated in the course, they come across very differently. They have a different standing. And I think time has to be invested in doing a mapping of who are your advisory board members, what are their strengths, where do you have gaps in your advisory board. It's not, you not only want to have the key Jewish educators in the community or the key rabbis, but you want to have people who may be supporters of a Jewish school, maybe people who care about Jewish education but have not been active in the community. It's thinking in a broader way. And of course, you want to have people who have the ability to make a contribution. Other areas under this, from recipient to solicitor, is how many of you do alumni campaigns? Okay, you should produce, I'm going to give you a challenge, Judy. you should take the case examples from the different schools that are doing alumni campaigns and send out a memo giving examples of successful alumni campaigns.
And we do.
You know. And then there should be a challenge for you that aren't doing an alumni campaign to have an opportunity to talk about with your colleagues, why haven't I done an alumni campaign? Why do I say it wouldn't work in my community? You have to be learning from each other. But it seems to me that you may have alumni whose life has changed as a result of a course or courses. For instance, you know, the example that was given this morning about when Alan Hoffman spoke about that board member who said, I can't come to the meeting because I don't want to give up my course. That's the kind of person I want to be on the local Melton School for Adult Jewish Learning Board,
Melton
advisory.
School, just call us the Melton School,
Okay,
it's easier.
Okay.
And by the way, can I just add a caveat, that
Yeah.
student that we heard about today was from Central Synagogue,
Yeah.
where Melton is the best of the best. And that's, so I just want to sort of make the connection to last night, we talked about that congregation, about how they brought Melton to their congregation.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I would say, because of my familiarity with the Central Synagogue, I would say, how do you capture that person's interest, if you know who the person is, and have them help in raising funds from other members of the congregation? Because if the person has a position of standing and just not a 3-time-a-year person, but somebody who's invested in the congregation through the school, then how do you capitalize on that? There's also naming opportunities. Have any of you named courses or named the semester, or what's been the response?
People like it. They find it much more personal and appealing, and it gives them kavod, and it's another way of getting people to up their participation or investment.
Right, but it can't be seen as a lone step. In other words, I would hope that that person would then be brought in to the advisory board and involved and discussion. Look, you really like the idea of naming. Which of your friends do you think would also like to name? Which of your friends would like to have an honorial, which is an honor, or a memorial in memory? You can do a curriculum, you can do a semester, you can do a course, you can do a lecture, and you can have a sliding scale of those contributions to be able to do that. Now I know, and I say this again, I know for some of you this has not been natural to your understanding of being the director of the school. But I think it's thinking that you have to begin if you want the school to flourish, and if you want the school to deal with the issues I spoke about in the beginning. There's also an area of creative programming. And any of the schools doing webinars?
We're going to hear about
Okay.
Melton Online.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so webinars, offline courses. Do you all know what a webinar is? What? Yeah, okay, so. Being creative and doing maybe even one-day learning programs. Anybody doing that?
Yes.
Okay, this is, I would say, on these kind of ideas, you have nothing to lose if you try it once. If you're not doing it, try it once. You know, like, anybody remembers the commercial? Try it, if you like it. Try it, it'll pay off.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
In terms of a webinar, we have to be careful. And, I mean, I have nothing against technology, and I've done webinars with a lot of things, but I just warn people that we have to be careful not to lose our focus, which is building community. And it would be too easy to fall into online courses or online webinars, etc., where we might be able to reach more of the masses, but then again, compromise on the community and the strength of what we are. And I'm just only saying it as a caveat, not to say never do it.
Excellent. So I want to give you, this is an example of the kind of creative program development that should be going on. When, given what you said, when would I use a webinar? If there was a course in which an issue was discussed, and the expert in that issue lived here or lived in another city, and you wanted to enhance the program, so one session would be done as a webinar or as a video conference. What that shows the students is the creativity and flexibility. I'm one of those continual learners. I mean, just share with you that in addition to learning Daf page of the Talmud every day, I also go to the Pardes Institute, and I'm taking a course in Chassidut. And I've been super impressed with the pedagogy of the teacher, who has been extremely creative. And that creativity has had an impact on me in saying, I want to take other courses there. Maybe there are other teachers of that. So the creativity that you display in enhancing the educational experience fits in because it builds the support. And it spreads the word. Yes?
I don't know if it's the right place to say it, but we're trying one thing to do that kind of combines all your three things. We're doing a morning of Milton learning. We're having beloved teachers teach their favorite Milton class, and we're using it as a friend and fundraiser, and awareness raiser. And it's pretty easy to do.
Okay. So you don't have to answer, but the next question that you should be asking yourself is, now what do I do with this? Now that I've done these three things, and that I have these people, how do I then move it to the next level? Do you do like consumer surveys, surveying potential students and students about the times and about the subjects? You're only limited by your own creativity. And I want to encourage you, and I do this with nonprofit boards all the time, to say to them, don't be afraid to make a mistake. We're not doing brain surgery. And if you take the risk, you can sometimes learn more from taking the risk and learning from a mistake. But if you don't take the risk, you don't have the potential to do something creative. One of the things that I feel very strongly about, and I use a lot, is this whole idea of a focus group process. You can identify people in the community. You can do one focus group with students, former students. You can do a focus group with people who are not connected to the school, that you would like to be connected. You invite 10, I would say no more, 10 is the optimum, maybe 12, but no more than 15 people. And you have a discussion with them. You invite them to meet. It's best if it's done informally in somebody's house, but sometimes it's done within the context of the organization. And you invite them and you say, we would like to get your thinking on some things. We think you can share your opinions and your views. What you may find out is that people who have not been supportive of the school have not been supportive because they don't know anything about the school. You might find out that you have people who would like to be involved but didn't know how to get connected to be involved. Or you might learn about challenges you didn't know you had in the community. But what it communicates when you reach out to people and ask them to participate in this kind of process, it says to them, oh, you're thinking about me, that I can share something. It's a very, very important process. It's a way of building in this buy-in, which I see is really as building shared responsibility for the school. And that feeds back into many of the other things I said about shared responsibility can lead to collaboration, can lead to coordination. Shared responsibility can lead to a difference in funding and how the funding is seen, because it's no longer I'm funding them, I'm funding us. And that has to do with the branding, that it's not them, it's we.
I have a question about the focus group. If your purpose is to learn from the people, how do you balance learning from them and sharing about Melton? Because I think it's, I don't know, it could send a really bad message if you bring them in and listen to them and then pitch them. Like if your
No, you don't
goal is to
pitch that.
listen, you listen.
In the context of the discussion, somebody will say something that's totally inaccurate, and somebody else will say, is that true? And that, it's in the context of the discussion that you get to deliver a different kind of message. You know, you have to be very clear, not to be defensive at all. Because when you do a focus group, you hear things that you may not want to hear. And you hear things that are extremely inaccurate. And you want to jump up and say, that's not true. And you have to contain yourself. But one of the things that happens as a focus group is, at the end of a focus group, you know, you can throw out the idea, would any of you like to participate like in a one-time example of how we teach? And you may get 3 from one group and 4 from another group, and you may wind up doing one group, but you're going to have one group of friends that you didn't have before. Yes.
I was wondering how you convince people to come to a focus group if these are the people that you want to get to take Mountain haven't taken it yet. How do you get them to actually come?
By doing your mapping, find out who's connected to who has a relationship with who, and the invitation comes from the person that they're most likely to say yes to.
Okay, thank you.
No,
That's really helpful.
And that's why there is nothing more important than mapping either your students or mapping your advisory committee members, or even having an understanding. When I say the word community, and I mean the institutions, how do you understand who your friends are in the other communal institutions? And so if, for instance, the JCC has been most supportive, and if people are connected to the board of the JCC or the students, then you have the student reach out. You know, the only way you're going to get Mr. Cohn there is if Mr. Schwartz calls him. And so you ask Mr. Schwartz because he's gone to 17 Mountain School courses. And, you know, he can make the pitch, not you as the director.
Right, that's great.
It just occurs to me when hearing you talk about these focus groups, how I can't tell you how many countless times I've spoken to various different directors who had in mind a foundations class starting at a particular day school, or a certain, one of the scholars courses, or even regular mountain courses that didn't materialize. People didn't show up in the end. The class didn't happen. You're left with books that you haven't sold, and so forth. And I just wonder if trying to get a focus group together with that same population to find out, because we make assumptions about why the class didn't happen, about why the population didn't materialize. It would really be great to really find out why, by asking people,
Yes.
Like Dovka, the place where we didn't get a good response,
right.
To find out why.
I'll give you an example. If you're talking about, and my assumption may be wrong, but if you're talking about, let's say, a community school, where a Jewish day school that's a community school, as opposed to one that's identified with a particular movement, and where you may have a whole host of reasons of why people send their children to the school, but that some of the parents could be potential students, there you might do a focus group and say to the teachers, if you have a good relationship with the day school, say to the teachers, maybe you want to recommend to 1 or 2 of your parents to come to this meeting, because we would like to do a cooperative program between the day school, and the Milton school. And that way, people are coming and you're just having the discussion of what would they like to see, what would be important. But I want to encourage, you're not talking about sales, because if they come to the meeting and you say, you know, we have these 14 different courses and this is what we can give you. The question has to be, what would you find most helpful? What are the issues you have about Jewish life?
I'm wondering why you said a community school as opposed to one affiliated with.
I guess I don't know enough about the Milton curriculum to know whether Orthodox parents would be involved in the Milton course, but that may be my mistake.
Well, that is definitely more of a challenge than the other.
Yeah, yeah. I want you to be successful at first.
Oh.
Then you're up to the end.
But at a Schechter school.
Yes, Schechter school, right.
What's the difference between a stakeholder and a partner?
I didn't hear the question.
Well, the difference between a stakeholder and a partner. I'll confuse it and tell you that not all stakeholders are partners, but some partners are stakeholders. Okay. A stakeholder usually means somebody who really cares about whatever it is, whether it's a business or it's a nonprofit. In other words, somebody who has an interest in it and is concerned about it and would like to see it develop and flourish. He doesn't necessarily, or she doesn't necessarily need to partner with you. But partners generally have an interest in the sustainability of the organization. That's why I said that some partners are stakeholders. And generally when we talk about stakeholders, we talk about donors. If you talk about a community, you talk about the other institutions in the community that really want to see the Milton School succeed. Those would be stakeholders. Don't get caught on the language. You want to develop friends, people who care about the Milton School and want to see it be successful. So I hope I was successful at stimulating you to begin thinking about the issues that you confront. And I apologize, if in any way I was just off base.
No. Would you like to take a ride to the desert with us and just keep going?
Thank you very much.